What you're looking at right here is the very first ideation sketch of the 1999 gorgeous Mercedes CL. It was penned by Australian-born designer Peter Arcady Payne on the back of an airmail envelope while he was on a flight to Australia. I think it's such a cool story because he was one of several designers at Mercedes at the time, invited by Mercedes from all around the world to bring proposals for the new Mercedes CL at the time. And it was based on a concept from 1996 called the F200, which actually had Lamborghini doors. Of course, as we know, this little sketch actually turned into be the production version. It was a bit controversial. So let's have a look at this design before we jump into the redesign. Suggested by one of my followers on Instagram who DM'd me and said it would be cool to see a redesign of this. So that's what we're gonna do in this video. It is in my opinion, one of the most gorgeous Mercedes coupes of recent times, so it is going to be a bit of a challenge to try and update this design, but we're gonna give it a shot. So what we're looking at here is the Mercedes CL65. This was the big boss of the CL of the time, and this was powered by the twin turbo, bi-turbo in Mercedes language, V12, and it was just a beast. They also had the CL55, which had the bi-turbo V8, and you had the CL500 and the 600 as well. So looking at this design, it was a bit controversial when Peter proposed this design and styling, because it had this pillar, this greenhouse, which was very unlike anything Mercedes was doing at the time. And you also had this front end, which had these of the time pretty normal four separated headlights, which made the front end maybe look a little busy in comparison with what was going on in the entire rest of the body. And I can kind of see that specifically with this CL65 lower intake, AMG intake, but I think still it's one of the best looking sedan coupes of Mercedes in recent times, even with this front end. So looking at the side view here, if we look at the sketch, it looks pretty much very close to what Peter envisioned in his sketch. It doesn't have the same wheelbase, obviously, because if you have a sketch, the wheels are way bigger, and the wheelbase then kind of shrinks, and to create some nice proportions in the sketch. But other than that, when you look at the sketch, it translated very well into production, specifically this greenhouse that Peter sketched out. And this actually has a connection in Mercedes history, because this takes a lot of inspiration from the W111 coupe from the 60s. Also a very beautiful Mercedes coupe. And if you look at that, I think this roofline is a perfect modernization of that design. And he wanted it to be almost like an architectural in its approach, and I think he managed to do that. And then you have these clear, really sharp graphics in the rear that cuts in and sits a little lower than they did on the sedan S-Class, giving it a much more sportier look in a side view. Now, the money shot of this car, like with many cars, I think, is the 3/4 rear view. And here you can see I put in this is actually the CL55 in the side view from 2001, I believe, and this is the CL65, as you can see here, from 2003. So here you can see the differences in the facelifted taillights. Compare that to the earlier version, which had 2 white stripes. In the facelifted version, you have 4 thinner white stripes, and I think both of these look very good. This look a little bit more modern than it does on the pre-facelift version, but still very similar in everything else except for these white stripes. What I love about this rear end and this generation of Mercedes is the AMG package, the styling package, the bumpers of AMG that looked pretty identical on every single model that they had at the time. And I think they add so much to the normal models of Mercedes of this time. And you have the quad tailpipes, of course, bazooka tailpipes in the bottom, blacked out with a very simple diffuser. You don't need anything else than this. I also love these 65 standard wheels, comparing those to the almost monoblock design that we have in the CL55. Both very nice looking wheels straight out of the factory. Looking at the interior, I think this is a very good interior because you don't need anything else, and what's here is super high quality. You don't have a lot of stuff, but the stuff that's in here feel like they put in a lot of effort into creating and manufacturing this thing. You have a carbon fiber center dash here. This is specific for the AMG models. It looks like, I'm not sure what is, if this is white leather on top of this steering wheel. This is probably an option, but in typical Mercedes fashion, if we zoom into the gauge cluster, Mercedes being a company, a brand that is focusing primarily on luxury, you can see how much real estate the speedometer takes out, and then you have almost the tachometer at the side here, almost like a companion or an addition, a byproduct to the speedometer. It doesn't take up too much space, which tells you that this is more focused on luxury and not high revving sports car, which is proper for a Mercedes in my opinion. Other than that, very simplistic interior, and I think this is an interior that I would love to sit in for a long time, even today. Simplicity and quality is what Mercedes were focusing on in this era of Mercedes. So let's jump into the redesign here and let's see how this CL65 AMG from 2003 is going to turn out. So I'm a huge fan of the Mercedes CLA, the current one. They have a shooting brake over in Europe, which they don't sell here, which I think is a really cool design. But especially the front end of the new CLA looks tight, it looks sharp, and I think that front end could suit a modern version of the Mercedes CL. So I'm gonna add that and focus on that, redesign some bits of it, the headlights for example, to fit these proportions better. I don't want the headlights to be too big, so I gotta shrink them down a little bit and make everything around that fit the overall line flow of the car. So when Mercedes was developing this back in 1993, when it first started, as I said, they invited, this is what they usually do under Bruno Sacco, they invited a bunch of designers, not just exterior designers within Mercedes, but a lot of different departments of Mercedes were allowed to actually present their ideas of design proposals for new Mercedes cars. And I think that's a really cool approach, because that will give you a very wide range of different perspectives from different types of minds. You have interior design, maybe you have some other CMF or something like that, and then you have exterior designers, and you get all these proposals, and then you can find out how they are thinking differently, and then maybe combine a couple of designs to make the 3/4 scale models, and then eventually the full clay models as well. But in this case, it feels like, I think what Peter Arcadi-Payne sketched here on this envelope was from the get-go a very clearly defined design that obviously the management of Mercedes liked. Peter said that he wanted this to be almost Jaguar inspired, a sleeker lower body, and that the glass in the rear should almost be like a bubble, similar to the W111 coupe from the 60s. As I mentioned earlier, this was a pretty controversial design by Peter because of the architectural pillars of the greenhouse and the wraparound windshield, but I think he won the argument by connecting it to Mercedes history, as in the coupe from the 60s, and bringing that into a modern design. And the most controversial thing about the sketch was the front end with the four separated front headlights. This felt, at least I feel now, 20 years later, something like that, that this is the part that isn't as timeless as the rest of the car. The coupe lines and the roof line look like they could be from a modern Mercedes, and that's why I think this redesign is interesting, because if we just change the front end to a modernized Mercedes look, I think the rest of the car will automatically feel natural as a 2023 model. And I've used these wheels before that I'm going to use here in this redesign, and those are the wheels from the new Mercedes S-Class or 2021 S-Class. I think these wheels are some of the best looking wheels straight out of the factory, and it suits Mercedes. They have some complexity in it with the spokes being V-shaped, and then you have another single spoke in the middle of the V, but they still look very simplistic and elegant at the same time, and that's what Mercedes S-Class specifically and the big coupes like the CL are all about. It's simplicity, but with a touch of complexity within that simplicity. And I think these wheels just symbolize that very well. So if we take the CLA front end, we redesign the headlights of the CLA, make them suit a big coupe a little better, meaning shrinking them down, making them less stylized in the outline. I think that looks really good on the body of the 1999 Mercedes CL, and that's what's happening here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.